we took a look at H1Z1. We're like, what is the core essence of the game, right? And it comes down to the pure combat of it, vehicles and the movement. And then we're like, well, there's some things that just don't, they're not necessarily going to feel really good on a console controller, right? Like, no one ever gets excited about inventory management. Like, no one's like, oh, that's such a fun thing. It's just not. So, we took the time, we went through, and inventory management, we removed that, crafting, salvaging, like all these things that just really weren't needed for, the PS4 version of the game, to give it, more of a refined take. So when we looked at the whole package and it came down to match pacing, console multiplayer games are typically a little bit quicker. You don't sit in a match for, upwards of 20 or 25 minutes or half an hour. It's usually like 10 to 15 minutes. And we want to do what we could to kind of compress all that down. But in doing so, we had to do things like the looting system, for example. The cone looting. You can just go in and like vacuum up the loot that you need and then like just move on and get into the action. So a lot of these changes were all made just with that in mind, to make sure that the PlayStation 4 version of H1Z1 was the best version that it could be. Let's start with like armor and helmets, for example, right? So in the PC version, helmets absorb a bullet and then they break. Armor typically absorbs 1 bullet, up to 2 bullets, and then it breaks. For the console version, since we got rid of inventory management, it's more of a damage mitigation kind of. So like once you're wearing armor and helmets, you can just absorb more shots before they break, because it's not I got shot once into my inventory, equip another helmet, back out, and then back into the game. So that was like one of the big things that we changed. The weapon wheel was a new one as well, so this way you can kind of switch on a controller, seamlessly, pretty quickly. The removal of salvaging and crafting, something else that required you to dive into your inventory, select the items you want to do, and then go ahead and break them down, select the new one that you want to make, and like that was, it felt cumbersome on a controller. So it was like, let's eliminate that step, we'll put that stuff in the world, and have access to it. The airdrop system. So on PC, you get between 1 and 3 airdrops at most at a time. On console, it could drop up to like, I think 20 or 25. And we're using that just to do the progression, to kind of bring the match, to accelerate everybody in together so we can shorten the match times. Gas pacing was the exact same thing. We needed to make it so the waves moved sooner. But in order to do that, people had to be mobile, so we had to add more vehicles. And so you can see, like, when you look at the whole picture, it was just like, well, we need to do this, so we have to do this, and we have to do this, and we have to do this. And it was all these changes to make it, that refined, pure BR that we wanted to get for console. And so there's no way we could have just ported it, because it just wouldn't have been a good experience. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the biggest ones is UI. So mouse and keyboard, click stuff and just kind of roll with it, right? With console, it's all about doing the most with the least amount of button interactions possible, and that's one of the big key things. Obviously, the other things are, it's a technical limitation, but at the same time, it's kind of nice when you look at hardware limitations of the console. Sure, you have limited resources, but at least you know that everybody has the same resources. So that one's like, tale of two-sided story. From the other aspects, a lot of it really was impetus on the inventory and the inventory management, which why it was just removed. And then there's other technical things too. It's like a good balance of things like aim assist without feeling too overbearing versus not enough. In a game like H1Z1 where engagement ranges become very, very long, like how do you make it feel good while still letting the player feel like a sense of accomplishment when they actually get a kill? Because you don't want to just hold their hand, because then they're like, oh, the game's doing it for me. And if you don't hold their hand at all, they're like, I can't hit anything, because, unlike more corridor style shooters where they're 5-10 meters in front of you, they're 75-80 meters away. And so just the balance of that was, they're challenges, and they're things that we don't really have to worry about too much on PC just because of the interface platform. So we've been in development for quite a few months now. Daybreak wanted to invest on the PlayStation 4 version of H1Z1, so they actually spun up its own dev team. This way, PC can continue with development and features, console can spin up and do their thing as well. So it's had a team on it for, like I said, multiple months at this point. But it's been nice because it's been a team that is able to just focus on that, focus on console, while the PC team can focus on their stuff as well. So it's been a pretty good mix of teams in the studio. Yeah, so it all depends on like the type of content, right? when we look at the future, like Daybreak has a heritage of the whole games as a service model, right? Like EverQuest is going on something insane, like 19 or 20 years at this point, right? And so, we're very much about continued content for a platform. So when we come up with new content and how do we do things, we'll look at like, can these be shared? So there's some things like, say, let's take an event, for example. So Shoddy Sniper, self-explanatory, right? That's all that spawns on the map. That's something that can pretty easily just be like shared between the two of them. Whereas if we get into different things, whether it's, I don't know, try like mass group events or something where like player counts are through the roof, that maybe console can't use that just because of performance limitations and other things, right? And so we got to be careful with what we look at and how we look at it, but there's a lot of things that can be shared, but there's a lot of things that can't be shared as well. So it's kind of like a piece-by-piece basis. A lot of them, right? And so it's tough because there is a instinctual reaction as a developer of like, let's not change too much. But then there's the other part where it's like, well, we should probably do our due diligence and change what needs to be changed, right? So I would say that when you look at things like the combat model was a bit tough for us. The PC, on the PC side of things, bullet speeds are quite slow. Bullet drop is pretty significant, but it's that speed and that drop really reward you when you land a shot. But having to lead that far and do that much drop on a console just didn't feel good. It didn't make sense. It wasn't familiar. And so that's why, we kind of changed the combat model. So I think that's, it's definitely one of the bigger things. And even things like crafting or salvaging, those are things that kind of go back to the roots of H1Z1, like way back in the survival day, right? They're still in the PC game, but ultimately at the end of the day, it just led to a better experience for the console player to not have those things. So we could get rid of inventory. Because like I mentioned earlier, like no one gets excited about inventory management. It's just not a fun thing to do, right? So a few different topics that, were controversial, but at the end of the day, I think the entire team agreed like the right choices were made for a game that feels really good to play. So, H1Z1 offers, I think, a unique experience. One of the big things is the vehicle play. The Battle Royales just don't have that. And, the fact that H1Z1's a little bit more on the arcadey side, so if like you ramp your cop car going off a mountain and catch massive air, like you can't do that anywhere else, right? And then the pure combat of it, the accuracy and the feel of the combat is definitely unique as well to H1Z1. And so it's more of a, if you're looking for a BR game that's more about just pure combat and mobility, then H1Z1's where you want to play it, right? The other BR games, they have very interesting systems to them, but if you don't feel like dealing with those things, you just want to get into a game, pick up a gun and shoot people, then H1Z1 will be, the game that you want to play. Well, we're super excited about PlayStation. Obviously, if you look at Daybreak's history, we used to be Sony, so there's just a lot of history there. The Sony community is amazing. It's massive. We've launched PlanetSide 2 on PS4, and so it's a familiar feeling. Like we have exposure, we have experience with it. We know what we need to do, especially when it comes to things like TRC requirements and stuff like that. And so it feels like home to us, and so that's why let's do PS4 first, and then once we're happy with where that's at, then we'll be open to other platforms for sure. But we wanted to start with PS4, and we're really excited to kind of build and grow that relationship with PlayStation.